though you sold it a while ago, and there is a conversation in the market around some of these high flyers as to whether it's time to lighten up, though maybe it's hard to do that because of the catalyst that Pete just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sold it 100 points ago, which is a little bit painful. But, investing's hard, and you have a reason why you buy and a reason why you sell. And I think, with Apple, the narrative for the past couple of years is that if you actually look at the revenues going back to 2015, the revenues have grown cumulatively about 17%. And so I think that's where ultimately people who thought, well, maybe Apple's had a big enough move. Well, boy, were we wrong, because the multiple expansion in 2019 has only been trumped by 2020. And I think that is the perfect example of, fundamentally, its revenues still aren't growing that much, but the market's in love with this stock, and it's really hard to step to the side of sentiment. And so I think as long as we're in this new normal where, these big tech companies have pristine balance sheets, they are growing. Apple had really good growth in Europe as well, about 20% this last quarter. The stock probably continues to go higher, but probably underperforms, we'll say, some of the other names if you do start getting some of the value names come back. But definitely I was wrong, and congratulations for all those who held Apple through the year. Yeah, but Jim, many of the points that Byrn makes are not wrong. That there are, you could find some fundamental issues to question with Apple growth. I mean, it's not like everybody on the street is a raging bull on Apple. It's just that momentum has carried it and run over any of the critics, any of the naysayers, any of the non-believers. It just continues to run them over.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the momentum. That's the word you just used. I'm thinking about where it's coming from. In part, it's coming from the company itself. I think you pointed out 467 is the number for it to reach $2 trillion. But remember, that's based on a share count as of June 30th. A month and a half into this quarter, they've certainly been buying back shares, and their share count is lower. We know they generate a ton of cash flow. We know they buy back shares. So frankly, some of that momentum is fundamentally deserved by the amount of cash that the company generates and that it recycles into reducing share count. However, saying that, there are risks, and you mentioned, or I think you alluded to, some of the antitrust issues that are out there. I tend to think that that is not going to come to pass. For one thing, I mean, everybody is in the crosshairs of the regulators, and if everybody's in the crosshairs, then nobody is. But the other thing is, look at Qualcomm. I mean, that's a comparable. You go back 20 years, people said it's anti-competitive, and has for 20 years, and yet they still keep winning court cases. They just won one 2 weeks ago. I don't think there's any legal liability that can be pinned on Apple. They're just being competitive.
I don't know, but what happens, though, if there are changes to the App Store structure and the amount of money that Apple
could be bad.
takes? I mean, does that have a real impact on where the stock could go? However, you may think this unfolds, whether it even gets to a courtroom or not.
So with the qualifier that you just said of, how far it actually goes, of course it could be negative. If the government actually starts to score points on Apple, that would be bad. But frankly, it would be bad for the whole tech sector. I mean, so far the government really hasn't scored any points on the big giants. They almost knocked out Qualcomm a couple of years ago with that FTC trial. That got overturned on appeals. Right now, right now the government's punching at air as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Joe, so we're approaching this $2 trillion in market cap. Is there any reason to use that as a lighten up symbol if you get to that level? I mean, look, I get the reasons why the stock's going up. Now, I don't know if once the split goes through, if people use that as a reason to sell. If anything, there seems conventional wisdom is it's a reason for the stock just to continue to go up, rightly or wrongly. What do you use the milestone for, if anything, if you're an investor?
I think you use the milestone for the same thing that you used $1 trillion, and that's breaking through the ceiling, Scott. And that's exactly what you're going to be doing at $2 trillion. And there'll be others in the growth space that will join Apple above $2 trillion. So I don't think there's any reason to sell there. All the reasons that have been identified so far are very strong reasons to stay with ownership of Apple. On Jimmy's point, I would point out, I had a conversation with Andrew Ross Sorkin about a year ago regarding Apple's ability to bundle its subscriptions. And I think ultimately you're beginning to see the signs of that, and that's going to remove some of the risks surrounding its services business. And I think ultimately it will significantly increase the momentum that they have been able to exhibit in services over the last couple of years. And lastly, as it relates to the stock split, that is absolutely a good thing for investors, and specifically small investors that don't own their stock. Keep in mind, small investors, they're basically maintaining a capital size in their portfolio of somewhere around, let's say, $10,000. You don't own Apple, and you've got a $10,000 account, and the stock is $400. You buy Apple, that's now 4% of your portfolio. You split the stock, and there's a diversification advantage to that where it's only 1%. And I think that's where there's very strong support for what Apple is doing once again, as they've split the stock so many times previously.
Yeah.